Hi everyone, welcome to Wine Styles Ankeny 10-minute tasting. Today we're going to talk about all things Sauvignon Blanc. This happens to be, I know, one of all three of our favorite wines to drink, no matter what time of year it is. And Sauvignon Blancs are really interesting from a geographic standpoint. Mm-hmm. So Cheyenne, tell us a little bit about the geography as it relates to Sauvignon Blanc.
Yeah, so Sauvignon Blanc is personally one of my favorites, mostly because its unofficial home is New Zealand, and New Zealand does hold a special place in my heart. But it is surprisingly one of the most widely planted grapes in the world. Just like Chardonnay, it's planted everywhere and anywhere, which does result in a wide range of flavors. And the really cool thing about that particular varietal is that it thrives in a lot of different soil types. So even if you have a loam-based soil or a basalt based soil, it's able to thrive in both. And so what I found when I was looking at the latitudes of where Sauvignon Blanc is grown, in both the north and south hemisphere, it's grown in the 32 to 45 degree latitude, which is a pretty wide range for grapes, but it does offer a lot of different areas for the wine to be grown. So within the old world, the big place where Sauvignon Blanc comes from is France, which is where it was first cultivated. Bordeaux and the Loire Valley are the two, in my personal opinion, best.
Absolutely. Some of our favorites.
There's a little controversy. Bordeaux thinks they were the first ones to plant it, and the Loire Valley obviously thinks they were the first ones to plant it. But yeah, clearly it comes from France, as like a lot of the noble varietals or international varietals have a pretty strong foothold in French culture. Yep.
And typically those sauves that come from France, they are much more acidic, and they have a nice gooseberry and nettles flavor to it with just a little bit of grass and some passion fruit. And then three of the other countries where there's a really big presence of Sauvignon Blanc has been Italy, Spain, and Romania, which I was very interested in.
That's interesting.
I haven't had a wine from Romania, but I really want to now.
We did a while back. We did an Eastern European tasting, and yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of very ancient varietals, of which most I can't pronounce the name, and nobody's ever heard of. But there was actually some very, very tasty wines. They really do a lot of whites and really do some classic winemaking over there.
And then, of course, outside of Europe, we have a bunch of different regions where Sauvignon Blanc is grown. New Zealand, its unofficial home. My favorites come from Marlborough and Gisborne, also known as Central Otago, which is nearly impossible to find in the United States.
Yeah, so I've not.
I end up usually just shipping them from there.
The interesting thing in the connection is, and maybe it's just me, but when I think of New Zealand, I think of a tropical island, you know, like Hawaii. I'm not sure why I think of it that way, but when you were talking about the latitude, you know, the 30th parallel is pretty close to the cold areas south of that, and the same in the northern hemisphere as we get to the 30th parallel. Those are cold areas, so New Zealand actually excels in wines that like the colder environment, and that's why it retains the high acid level. So, you know, I didn't know that until I started studying wine. I just pictured it as the same as Hawaii, just like Hawaii. Yeah, it's an island, right? It's supposed to be like Hawaii, but yeah, it's very interesting. That's actually a cool climate.
So, speaking of New World, I know California is doing a lot of great things with Sauvignon Blanc.
Yeah, so a lot of the really good Sauv Blancs are coming out of Napa and Sonoma. We actually have a Sonoma Sauv Blanc in our glass right now from Kate Arnold, but Napa has some phenomenal Sauvignon Blanc. And it's really interesting because a lot of those Sauvignon Blancs are, including from Sonoma, are anywhere between $10 and up to $30, which is a really good value for wines that come from those premium wine growing regions. But this one's phenomenal just because it does have a little bit more of a fig and citrusy, almost a guava taste to it, which compared to a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, which has that big grapefruit, a lot of greenery to it. And then a couple of the other New World areas where Sauvignon Blanc is being grown has been Chile, South Africa, and Australia, which if you have not had an Australian Sauv Blanc, I highly recommend. It's very good.
Yeah, so Cheyenne mentioned some of the different flavor profiles coming from Sonoma versus New Zealand, kind of the two main areas, or even Sancerre and France. So kind of tell us a little bit about the variation in the flavor profiles.
Well, there's many grape varietals that really take on their characteristics from the environment. Chardonnay is a grape that's thought to really take on flavors from its terroir. Riesling definitely will bring in flavors depending on where it's grown, and Sauvignon Blanc is one of those as well. So if we're talking about a Sancerre, so if you see on the bottle, it's a French wine and it says Sancerre, it's going to be 100% Sauvignon Blanc. And that's going to be more of a minerally, flinty, bone dry, high acid level. It usually is not going to have the really, really pronounced grapefruit and citrus, although it will have that characteristic that is going to be in there. It's interesting, every time Sauvignon Blanc comes up, every wine writer, every taster likens the flavor and aroma to gooseberries. So I don't know about you, or how many people have actually tasted a gooseberry or seen what it is. I thought, honestly, it was a berry like a strawberry or a raspberry. It turns out it looks a lot like a grape, and it tastes really, really sour and really not that delicious.
Yes, we learned that from picking out a gooseberry pie one time. We were so excited we were going to have a pie, and it was
not
essentially inedible.
It was not
so
good. So
obviously gooseberries coming through from that tartness in the wine is great, but I would highly recommend staying away from a gooseberry pie itself. Yes.
So if you're looking for, Sauvignon Blancs from around the world, definitely look for Sancerre, which is French. Also from the Loire Valley, right across the river from the region of Sancerre is Pouilly-Fumé, and they make fantastic examples of Sauvignon Blanc. And then back to California, actually when I was living in California, when Mondavi was really becoming dominant in the Napa wine world, he actually coined a new term, and it actually has been trademarked to be equivalent to Sauvignon Blanc, which is a Fumé Blanc. So if you see Fumé Blanc on the bottle, many California producers will use that terminology, and that comes from Robert Mondavi.
And didn't with those, he tend to put them in oak, which is interesting for a Sauvignon Blanc. Typically we're doing very little oak.
Well, there's different thought processes, and I think it's very uncommon to put these wines in new oak, where you're going to get a pronounced flavor profile from the oak itself. But it's not uncommon actually in Bordeaux and in Sancerre and in California to use used oak or neutral oak. So you're not getting, the barrels have been used multiple times, so a lot of the wood tannins and wood flavors are not remaining in the barrel, but it does allow the opportunity for oxygen exchange. Those are the two things we get from aging in a barrel, is it's porous, so there is a slow oxygen exchange that you're going to get that you wouldn't get in stainless steel, so it's going to change the characteristics. It wouldn't be typical to have that heavy new oak flavor.
Well, as they mentioned, first we tried the Kate Arnold out of Sonoma. Nice citrusy, a little bit of the cut grass, but just I would say kind of mellow in the flavor profile. Lots of fruit coming through, and I just poured the Grey Wacky, which is from Marlborough, now into our glass, which we just started carrying and is quickly becoming one of my favorite Sauvignon Blancs as well, if we're going to go to a different part of the world.
Yes.
And this one definitely has completely different notes on this. Getting more of that grapefruit, not overly grapefruit, heavy, I would say, but I don't know, what do you guys get off of
It's really nice. It's not too much on the citrus notes, but it has a little minerally characteristic. Definitely a really nice acid balance.
More acid, yes.
There's
very
just, like,
mouth-watering.
a little bit of greenery on it, and it makes me really hungry for pesto, which I think would be phenomenal with this particular Grey Wacky.
A chicken pesto pasta would be phenomenal, or a chicken pesto pizza. Yeah.
I think both of these wines are just absolutely spectacular, you know, examples of what Sauvignon Blanc can be. And if we were to have a Sancerre here, we would probably see even more of an acid level, and definitely more minerally flinty characteristics, and of course the cut grass. And then the one that I you know, again, these tasting terms are crazy what we throw around, but if you read on Sauvignon Blanc, you will see in tasting notes that there is a cat urine type aroma. And I was reading Jancis Robinson's book, and she says it's cat urine, but it's cat urine in the nicest way. I'm not sure how it's nice. I don't get cat urine from either one of these. I get just beautiful fruit and earthy aromas and flavors.
Yeah. Well, and the one thing I love about Sauvignon Blanc too is that it's so versatile with food. So you mentioned the pesto. One of our favorite things, I know we've mentioned this on other videos, to have Sauvignon Blanc with is spicy, like spicy Thai food.
I actually paired the Grey Wacky with some pork tacos recently.
That would be
phenomenal.
That would be great, yeah. So oftentimes we think of Sauvignon Blanc just as that summer wine, but it's something that I know we in our house drink year-round, both just as a nice evening glass and pairing it with our food too. So
it definitely has enough horsepower to hold up to many different foods, and I think we've said this and talked about this in previous tastings. There's no law that says you can't have this with a steak or a pork chop on the grill, or even pork tacos. I love that idea of that pairing. This would go well with just about anything you would put it up against.
Yeah, and if you're trying to learn more about wine and the old world and new world regions like Cheyenne was talking about, Sauvignon Blanc is the perfect place to start, because it does vary so much. Each wonderful in its own unique way, and learning and understanding the nuances of each different region is really fun.
So I think we should make a pact that we will travel to every region that grows
There
Sauvignon
you go.
Blanc.
That sounds perfect.
I think that's the next step.
Absolutely, yes. Well, thank you everyone for joining us as we talked all things Sauvignon Blanc, and cheers to you. We'll see you next week.
Cheers.